we have the pleasure of Mr. Jovan Buha from The Athletic, covering the Lakers, to join us today on a special edition of the Late Night Lake Show. Jovan, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Audio sounds good. Just want to make sure that you can hear us. Thanks again for joining us here today. So it's a pleasure to have you on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. So I know a lot of Laker fans, read your stuff daily. I've been paying close attention to your stuff. I think we even shared a laugh at, some of the recent content, some of the recent mailbag content. So that was
Yeah.
that was super fun. But I have actually, I wanted to ask you this question first before we get some speakers in, because I've actually known of your name for quite a while, even back when you used to cover the Clippers. I'm not sure if everyone knows that. So I would be remiss if I didn't just kind of start this off by, asking you, man, what's the difference between covering the Lakers versus covering the Clippers, man? If you don't mind sharing with us, what stands out?
It just cut out. I didn't hear.
Oh no, yeah. The question was, if you don't mind sharing with us, because I know that you covered the Clippers some time ago. I just wanted to know from your perspective, what's the biggest difference in covering the Clippers versus covering the Lakers that you found?
Oof, you're trying to get me in trouble
No,
here.
man.
I mean,
Jovan
I
has
think
he has a sidestep button. He can sidestep any question today.
I grew up in LA, born and raised. I grew up in Agora Hills. I went to USC, so I've never left LA. And I could say, being an Angelino, there's just a difference, right? Like 9.5 out of 10 people you meet are Laker fans, and maybe that numbers dropped a little bit with the Clippers being better over the last decade, but it's a different class, right? And that's no shade at the Clippers, but for me, I think growing up in LA, and I got into basketball during the Kobe Shaq era, and Shaq's my favorite player of all time, and it was a no-brainer opportunity for me when the Athletic approached me about it. And I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for, but
No.
it's been fun. It's been 2 weird seasons covering the Lakers. I got the 2 post-title seasons, and COVID was present for both of those. But I'm looking forward to hopefully having more of a normal season next year.
Right. And I know a lot of people would want to kind of jump on the mic here. We'll get some more people on the mic shortly, but okay. If you don't mind also sharing with us just another question, I'm not sure if you're preparing anything over this Josiah KD news. We all know in Lakerland that they're like our estranged cousin right now. Anything they do is kind of related to us in some capacity, or at least a good percentage of us would like to think, right? So I don't know if I've ever seen a owner come out and publicly, for all intents and purposes, just say, "Hey, I'm not with what my star player is saying right now. I'm not going to acquiesce to him." I'm pretty sure you've never seen anything like that either. I mean, to you, does this news from yesterday, does this kind of bode well for the Lakers? Are you feeling a little bit more optimistic about any type of Kyrie to LA marriage than you did Saturday?
Yes. I think that if Kevin Durant is traded, which it seems like it's headed in that direction, the odds of Kyrie Irving being traded as well certainly increase by some percentage, right? I just think, looking at it logically, right? I don't see any reason why they would keep Kyrie if they do trade KD. I guess it depends on the package they get. Maybe if you get a Jaylen Brown and some, Marcus Smart, maybe you can still remain competitive in the East. But as my colleague John Hollinger wrote today, like, the Nets actually have some incentive to tank here. That depending on how the situation plays out, where they could have a lottery pick next year and really kickstart a nice rebuilding situation. And you got a couple picks from the Lakers for taking on uh, Russ, and then you flip KD for something, get a few picks, get some nice young players. Like, they could be one of the more attractive situations, and have a quicker rebuild. So I think really the one way to me Kyrie was not going to be moved was going to be, okay, KD wants to stay in Brooklyn. Let's run it back. Let's give it one more shot. Then he can test free agency next summer. But if KD is traded, which it looks like that's going to happen, I do think Kyrie will be traded shortly after, potentially even before, but most likely after. And I think right now the Lakers are in the driver's seat for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, all signs point to that because I have people, especially in sections of Lakers Twitter, telling me that this is all just a leverage act. This is all just to get Kyrie an extension. I mean, in your like, have you ever heard of a player a la KD going to these great lengths, all for like another grown man, another basketball player that's their friend, so to speak. But I'm just gonna do all of this and become the bad guy, all to make my friend more comfortable and get an extension. I mean, this is what like that's like the opposite of a trade going down, right? They're doing all of this just as an act, as a show. I don't think KD or anybody else is willing to do that for another human. I mean,
Yeah,
that,
no,
that
I think the situation became untenable yesterday, right? Like, I mean, this would have been the equivalent of like, Russ coming out and saying like, if they don't fire Frank Vogel, like I'm gonna leave or something. And
right.
like I think like it's hard to walk that back. And Joe Tsai made it clear he's sticking by Sean Marks and Steve Nash. So I don't. I mean, look, it's the NBA. Anything's possible. We've seen stars demand trades, and then it kind of ends up working out. But I just think all the signs have been pointing towards Kevin Durant demanded his trade. There was a little smoke there of, is he maybe going to stay? Can the Nets convince him? The Nets are trying to kind of run it back. But I think yesterday was kind of his declaration of, I want out, and, you guys need to make this happen unless you fire Sean Marks and Steve Nash, which the Nets clearly weren't going to do. So I think it was more of a leverage play on his part to just try and get out of Brooklyn. And
Right.
we'll see ultimately kind of what comes of that. But yeah, it was I mean, it was pretty surprising to me to see kind of both sides of it. Of Kevin Durant, it coming out from his side. This is what they want. They want those two out, and then Joe Tsai publicly responding to that and saying like, we're standing by them. Like, I just you don't really see it get to that level. So
Right.
that was that was entertaining.
Right. Entertaining is the right word. And Stace, I want you to jump in here too. But no, entertaining was the right word. It definitely was something that caught me off guard. And over here in Lakerland, I'm sure you catch a lot of the Genie slander and the Lakers front office slander, and some of it, people feel is well deserved. But I just can't imagine. I mean, it's almost like the antithesis of how the Lakers treat their stars, right? And so seeing that for me as a lifelong Laker fan was, I mean, it was such the opposite of what we've seen, how Genie approaches LeBron and other star, and how the Bus family has approached other star players in the past. So that was incredible to see. Stacey, I want you to jump in here. You could piggyback on that, or ask Jovan anything.
Okay, so I'm actually gonna just jump into last
Let's
season.
get to some Laker stuff.
Yes, I really just want to jump into last season. Okay, so as you know, okay, there's a large portion of Lakers Twitter that attribute like the unsuccessful season we had to one issue or maybe one player. I personally don't agree with that. I think there were several things wrong. So what do you say in regards to this? Like, why was last season such a bust?
Ooh. Now you're really trying to get me in trouble. I think
Sidestep button. Oh, come.
yeah, to your point, I mean, like, right, the elephant in the room, the player you're talking about is Russ. And I think Russ has taken probably too much of the blame. I do think that, I think two things can be true. I think Russ could have underperformed, which he did, and not been a good fit. And there could have been other issues. And it feels like, to your point, like a lot of Lakers Twitter is divided on, putting all the blame on Russ or putting all the blame on Frank Vogel or whatever. Like, I think there were multiple things, right? So I think you go back to the previous offseason. I think clearly not re-signing Alex Caruso, not to bring that back up, but I think that was a huge loss for the Lakers, and just kind of imagining. I mean, I think Alex Caruso would have been arguably their third best player last season, right? With the way that Russ played, like I think you could have made that case. So I think losing Caruso, and that was more of a financial decision than anything. The Lakers could have gone deeper into the luxury tax to retain him. They chose not to do that. That's their prerogative. But I think that was a big mistake. I think obviously some of the gambles on the older players, the DeAndre Jordans, Trevor Arizas, Kent Bazemore's, Wayne Ellington's, like those guys did not pan out and did not play to. You were hoping at least a couple of those guys hit, and really
Right.
none of them hit. Melo hit for a bit and had a good start to the season. Malik obviously hit, a younger guy, gamble on him, but like really, and then your primary free agency addition, Kendrick Nunn, doesn't even play a game. So
Yeah.
in terms of the players they added, it was almost the worst case scenario across the board. Then with the Russ trade, it was just, if you were drafting, depending on your opinion of Russ, if you were drafting like all-star level players to surround LeBron and AD with, I think he was probably the worst possible fit you could have brought in. I mean, maybe Ben Simmons is the worst fit because he's not even playing, and like, he won't even take threes. But I think really it's like between Russ and Ben, but at least Ben
They're
Simmons
going
is
to
six
argue Ben
nine.
Simmons all defensive first team.
Yeah, he's a 6'9", all defensive guy. So at least there's some, but he didn't play last season, so
Right.
maybe that's a worst case scenario. Kind of worse than Russ. But aside from that, like you can go down the list and like even Kyle Lowry, going back to that 2021 trade deadline, like in retrospect, that trade looked a lot better, where you would have kept more of those guys and kept some of that depth. But I think really, if you go back over the last decade and the way teams have been built and the teams that have won championships, if it's been a big three, the big three have to really fit together. Like, look at Golden State. I mean, they kind of had a big four for a bit, but their big three complement each other well. Even going back to Miami, like, Wade took a back seat. Bosh had to adjust his game. Same thing in Cleveland where Kevin Love had to adjust. Like, I think there was only so much that Russ could do. And I don't think he adjusted his game as much as he could have and should have. But even if he did, I still think there was ultimately going to be a limitation to just his fit as a third wheel with LeBron and AD. So, yes, I think that Russ made some false promises to those two of things he was going to do. And you saw early in the season, he was setting some more screens on the ball and playing off the ball a little bit more. But really that went away, within the first 10 games of the season. And he just kind of became the player that he's always been. But, he's 33. He's regressing a little bit. And really across the board, it was his lowest numbers since his first or second season in the league. So I do think that Russ, to me, that's one of the more controllable things is, I just think they made a mistake in trading for Russ, and he didn't do everything that he had initially said he was going to do. So that's where I think some of the blame is credible, but I do think too much has been made on him. And then also, Frank Vogel, I think some of his rotations, sticking with DeAndre Jordan too long, sticking with Avery Bradley, and benching Austin Reeves late in the season when they needed to win that game in New Orleans. Like, I think he
It's
deserves some blame,
criminal.
but
Criminal.
there's a big blame pie to go around, and no one was perfect.
Right.
And then
I
look,
actually thought
LeBron
at
and
one.
AD were also injured, right? So I
Yes.
think that's arguably the biggest thing. Like
Thank
those two
you.
guys,
Thank you.
play 20 more games combined, and this team's at least in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, I actually thought with Malik Monk benching after averaging 20 points as a starter, I thought maybe there was some like Steve Nash, Jason Richardson type background stuff going on. I mean, if you know, you know. Go ahead, Stacey.
Well, okay, so I mean, I'm just glad that he mentioned the other factors. But okay, so I have a question, but I'm gonna hold that one off for a little bit. But let me just go with this one. So obviously, Coach Ham came in and sort of like went, proceeded to clean house a little bit, right? But
Mhm.
he obviously retained Coach Handy, who's like a favorite amongst Laker Nation. Um, Obviously, they have history, they have a friendship there, that sort of thing. But why do you feel like it was so important, like a necessity, to make sure that Phil Handy was still there?
Yeah, well, Phil is beloved by the players. He's a locker room favorite. So I think he obviously has a history with LeBron dating back to Cleveland. He's been. I mean, he had that stretch there where he was on like multiple championship teams in a row. So I think that's a big part of it. He's a player development guru. Where one of his primary focuses is developing the young guys. He works with all of them, reviews film. He's been training with them in the off season, in their off season workouts. He's a great relationship across the league, and I think is someone that opposing players kind of look at as like that is the type of coach I would like to play under, even though he's not a head coach. And also, I think that there was an element of I don't think he was ever seriously considered for the Lakers head coaching position, but the Lakers still wanted to, he was someone that they valued. And it was like, we might not think you're ready for a head coaching spot right now, but we want to keep you on staff, give you a promotion to, a higher position on the coaching staff. And then also, kind of make sure you're on board with Darvin. So I think he is, one of the most liked assistant coaches around the league, and he has a lot of value again for his relationships and player development, and in some ways kind of similar to Darvin in that sense of what Darvin was doing in Atlanta and Milwaukee. So I would not be surprised if some point down the road he gets some more serious looks from other teams, and or maybe gets an associate position with another team. But for now, I think he's a real asset for the Lakers, and was someone that I know it was important for them to retain.
Definitely. And speaking of development, I mean, I read your piece. I know kind of that on THT, you were on him currently, as the roster is currently constructed, being out of the rotation. Um, and I was just he has that player option coming up. So as far as him, this went from, I mean, the fall off has been, kind of wicked, right? So
Yeah.
Lakers fans were expecting a lot out of him, and then last year was kind of a bust when the opportunity seemed to be there. I don't know if overlapping skill sets with Russ is like the main issue to attribute to that or not, but with his player option coming up, I mean, uh, THT. Why do you have him out of the rotation? And at this point, does that mean for you his biggest a bonus to the Lakers is as a tradable asset? Or is it, what could he do to get in the rotation?
Yeah, I think what he could do is, I think first and foremost improve as an off the ball player. I think primarily as a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I think that is obviously one of the weaknesses of his game, and something that just playing on a team with multiple stars, multiple guys that need the ball, like those surrounding support guys need to be able to shoot and space the floor. And right now, I mean, for as much as we rag on Russ for his shooting, like THT is arguably the worst shooter on this team. You could make that case. So I think that is something that he definitely needs to improve on. I think the one path to the one clear path right now, aside from that, to him being in the rotation is his defense, and just if he defends at a level that Troy Brown or Stanley Johnson or JTA or Austin Reeves can't defend to, or at least defends better than one of those few guys. Like I think there's a spot for him potentially, just because I think this team needs perimeter defense, and whichever guys can prove themselves on that end, be switchable, defend multiple positions. Like I think that's a way into the rotation. But I just think it's really, if you look at the current, and of course this can always change depending on what moves the Lakers make. Like I think what one way I believe I put it in the mailbag that I could see THT being more in the rotation is like if the Lakers trade Russ for a Buddy Hield, Miles Turner package, all of a sudden you now need some more playmaking, and shot creation and just some ball handling skills, that's where I think THT grows in value. But as currently constructed, I mean, you have LeBron, you have Russ, who projects to be in the rotation for now. You have Kendrick Nunn, who I think the Lakers plan on having be their primary second unit, backup point guard, and then you even have guys like Lonnie Walker and Austin Reeves who can handle the ball a bit, and that's before even mentioning AD, who's going to have his fair share of pick and rolls and post ups and ISOs and stuff. So I just think that THT's strengths are kind of mitigated with having Russ on the roster, and just having two primary ball handlers in LeBron and Russ. THT is at his best with the ball in his hands, and I just think there's a limitation to how much he can have the ball in his hands, and that's why I think you saw him struggle, having to play off the ball so much last season. Played a lot of small forward, which I guess maybe with this current roster construction is the position he'll have to play, but I just think that there's, so again, kind of looking at Lonnie Walker, I think I'm not too high on the Lonnie Walker signing, but I think he is a better shooter than THT, and he is someone that they invested in. So I think clearly there's like sort of the Malik light, Malik 2.0 type potential there for that role for him. I think Austin's going to start. From what I've heard, he's the favorite to start right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. A lot of people have Austin starting in their projections.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I don't know if you want him ultimately starting, but I do think that based on the current wings they have, you can make the case he's their best 3-and-D wing. You have Troy Brown in the mix, who might be, I mean, was their second best shooter last year behind LeBron statistically in terms of percentage. So, like, I figure he's probably going to be in the rotation. He's also a solid defender. So, I just think it's kind of a rotation squeeze of, right now I have the starting group as Thomas Bryant, AD, LeBron, Austin, and Russ. And then my second unit is Damian Jones, JTA, Troy Brown, Lonnie Walker, and Kendrick Nunn. Now, could THT beat out, Lonnie or Kendrick? For sure. And I think that there's a chance there. But just from conversations I've had with people around the team, THT's name is rarely brought up. And it just seems like as of now, he's going to have to prove himself in training camp and in the preseason to kind of earn his spot back in the rotation.
Right. Definitely. All right, man. Stacey's going to go ahead and get some speaker requests off. I know you guys have been waiting. Jovan, if we were like, if you were kicking it in the garage with your best friend and your best friend asks you, hey, on what level of 1 to 10 should I be concerned about LeBron's extension? 1 being not concerned at all, 10 being highly concerned. What would you tell your best friend?
I'd say at 3.
All right.
So
3. That's a pretty low level of concern.
I put it pretty low. Yeah. I think the extension situation is really just a leverage play where LeBron, and not even necessarily just for trading Russ. I do think that's part of it, but you just have more leverage with kind of this uncertainty, right? And we have seen LeBron commit more to the Lakers than he has in Miami or in Cleveland. So I think on the one hand, I just don't think he's leaving. I think the one way he leaves, if he does not sign the extension before the season, I think the one way he leaves is if they have a repeat of last year. But I don't think they're going to have a repeat of last year. I do think they ultimately end up moving Russ at some point, and I think they're going to be better. So whether he drags us out till June 30th or whether he comes to some agreement before training camp, I do think that LeBron is going to extend. It could only end up being an extra season to maintain that flexibility for Bronny, and depending on how much longer he wants to play and where Bronny's at in his development and as a prospect. But I think he's going to stay in LA, and I'm not too worried. Again, I think if the Lakers keep Russ and they have a disaster season again, maybe that is the impetus that forces him to reconsider. But I think he loves being in LA. I think he's loved his time with the Lakers so far, and I think he's going to stay. But again, no certainties, but I do think I'd put it at like a 3 out of 10 right now.
For sure. That definitely matches up with kind of where I am as well. I have been trying to keep everybody calm. I'm not concerned. In terms of keeping leverage, not only does it keep leverage for LeBron, I actually am of the belief that it keeps the leverage for the Lakers, even in trade negotiations, because the less we dip into that 2023 cap, the more we stand as a player in free agency, which may have some impact. At least, that's what I'm of the belief of. But I definitely think the Lakers and LeBron are doing the right thing. A lot of people want moves to be made yesterday. Um, and I don't think we should be too concerned as long as anybody else isn't making any moves either. And it seems pretty dry on the landscape. So I'm not too concerned about the Lakers missing out on anything per se. Um, Stace, I know you wanted to jump back in here. Go ahead.
Um, well, okay. So I was going to ask a question in regards to something that I saw. I had seen one of the podcasts that you were on, Jovan. I think it was the Dime. It was a comment you made in regards to Anthony Davis playing the five. But I know you just mentioned your projected starting lineup for this coming up season, but you were pretty adamant that he had went like several decades or whatever you said without playing the center. Um, and what I noticed as far as when he was playing the five, he was listed as the five, but not all the time actually playing the five, kind of playing timid. And that's understandable because he was trying to, avoid injury and that sort of thing. But like, I guess looking back on it now, and then even with the roster that we have or we know of at this point, what do you think just in regards to him in that five position overall now?
Yeah, well, so I mean, this has kind of changed with the signings that they made because I had heard earlier in the summer that um, the this kind of projected model that they wanted to go with was going to be 80 at the five, LeBron at the four, add in a 3-and-D wing in free agency, and then go into next season with that player, someone else at shooting guard, and then Russ or whoever they end up trading him for. So that has changed, obviously. I think with the Thomas Bryant and Damian Jones signings, I think they're trying to go back to that 2019-20 kind of mold with when they had JaVale and Dwight, and
Right.
then AD could close games at the five. But AD actually played 76%. I just looked it up again on Basketball Reference. 76% of his minutes at the five last year. So I think he is more. He played more five than I think people remembered, and he is more open to it than he has been in years past. It was the second most center minutes he logged in his career. So I think it's the ultimate cheat code where just last year was really the first year it didn't really bear out, but looking at the first 2 years in LA and even going back to New Orleans, like just 80 at center, those lineups have always been so effective. And I don't think it's something you can necessarily do for 35 minutes a night. I don't, I think just the wear and tear, especially in the regular season,
Right.
is probably too much. But 15, 20 minutes a night, close games that way, I think that's the way to go. So
And
I think
he
when you look,
seemed more inclined to want to play the five when he didn't have to play it all the time. Would you agree with that? Because that's what I
yeah, and
noticed,
and and that was
or
part
tip,
that
yeah.
was part of the pitch with Russ was like,
Right.
they knew that bringing in Russ and with his shooting limitations, they were going to have to play more AD at the five just because. I mean, we saw it at the beginning of the season. Going DeAndre, AD, and Russ was a disaster offensively. So, that was, I think, part of also just AD kind of accepting, hey, this is the sacrifice I have to make. I have to play more center than I'd probably like to. But yeah, I mean, I suspect next season, like Thomas Bryant and Damian Jones are both on minimum contracts. It isn't a situation with like a Montrezl Harrell where he was making a certain amount, or Andre Drummond when they brought him in, he expected a certain role. So I think the Lakers are going to have that flexibility where they can close games with AD at the five, they can close with one of the other two, and they could even start AD at the five if they like it in a certain matchup. So I do expect it should be the best center rotation probably they've had since that 2019-20 season,
Right.
just because I think both guys serve kind of clear needs on this roster.
Okay. EP, go ahead.
Hey, Jovan, what's going on, man? It's funny. I never really heard the roster like recited to me until you just did it, and I realized, like I've read it, but it didn't
Yeah.
click till you just said it, and I'm like, wow, we really have a roster full of backboard crackers from three. So my question to you basically is: do you think actually reciting the roster through and realize we have no shooting, do you think that it's imperative that they have to trade Russ, or do you think there is a pathway forward with this roster as constructed with minimal shooting, pathway forward to the title?
Put some respect on Cole Swider's name, by the way.
I like Cole, but Cole got to
He's
crack
the
the
best shooter on the
rotation.
team.
He
For
got to
sure.
crack the rotation though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, like ideally you probably do move Russ for a shooting upgrade, just because I think that's like, I really like the moves the Lakers made this offseason. I think, given their limited resources to upgrade the roster, but aside from making a trade, they did about as well as they could have realistically. And I think the Lonnie move, looking at some of the other guys that went for the taxpayer MLE, I think you can maybe quibble with that, but I think JTA, Damian Jones, Thomas Bryant, and Troy Brown. Those were all solid moves for young guys with potential to varying degrees, and I think Thomas Bryant could end up being the best guy that they end up signing. But yeah, I mean, shooting is a real concern. I wrote, you might be able to make the case, like on paper, this is the worst 3-point shooting team in the league based off of last season's percentages. LeBron was the only above league average 3-point shooter on this team. And, we've seen LeBron have that success in Miami and Cleveland and in LA, being surrounded by guys who are at least league average shooters. Now, I think some guys are due for some regression. Lonnie, for example, has had seasons where he shot above league average. He's going to get the best looks of his career in LA. I think Thomas Bryant, had a 2-year stretch there in Washington where he was shooting close to 40% on very low volume, but I think he's someone who's due for some regression. I think all these guys are going to get the best looks. Troy Brown has been getting better as a shooter. So I think there's a chance that maybe some of these guys kind of pop and maybe develop. We saw Malik have a really good shooting season, but I think Austin is another guy who I know he's been doing 2 and 3 a days working on his shooting, and I was someone who at one point in the country was a top 5 shooter back at Wichita State. So I think there's some room for positive regression for some of these guys, but I think, I guess, to kind of get back to Russ, like, yes, I think one of the easiest ways to improve the shooting would just be Russ for Kyrie, Russ for Buddy Hield. But aside from that, like, it is a little concerning to me that the supporting cast and some of the guys they're relying on just are not proven shooters. And they could all have career years. We've seen it happen with LeBron before, but I'm a little skeptical on that. So I think that to me right now is probably the biggest concern with this roster.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, Cole Swider. I fell in love with this guy at Summer League, so that's why I put on a cape for him, man. All right, let's get Ricky in here. Ricky, Jovan is our founder of the Late Night Lake Show, with all of the different podcasts and spaces and articles and everything that the brand provides for content. So we want to get Ricky in here. He had a question for you real quick.
Hey, appreciate it, Guru. You too kind. Jovan, what's going on, man? Thank you for stopping by, bro.
Of course.
I mean, what you just laid out as far as your biggest concerns with the Lakers is evident. I think the Lakers and 3-point shooting have hated each other since the existence of the franchise. But with, Darvin Ham coming in and he's following Frank Vogel, 2 guys that, we haven't really necessarily thought of as offensive gurus out here. How do you just see Darvin Ham? I mean, look, Milwaukee's been 10th in 3-point shooting the last 2 years, right? Like, yes, it was a good part of their game, but they weren't the top 3 in the league about that. Do you see Ham being able to make adjustments with this roster for the style of basketball that he wants to play? And then do we have any insight just based on how the Bucks went and did their game? I know the 4-out, 1-in type of style, but just lining up with the roster that the Lakers have right now, how do you see Ham kind of forming an offensive identity with this team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something I've tried to glean some insight on and haven't been able to get much. But I think just looking at some of the stuff they ran in summer league, I thought, as crazy as it sounds, like I thought the offense looked better, and there was just more screening, more off-ball actions, not as much stagnation, and I think and that's not obviously Darvin coaching, but that's some of the principles he's been implementing. So I know one thing he's really been preaching on is pace. Now people might not think it, but the Lakers I know they were top 10. I think they were like 7th or 8th in pace last season. So it wasn't like they were a slow team by any means. And we know, going back to that championship season, that they were, the best team, the best transition team in the league that season. I think first or second, it was them in Toronto. And then, that's always been a staple kind of this team is they're good defensively and then they get out in transition. And I think they're going to try to get back to that. I think Darvin is going to prioritize 3-point looks more than Frank did. I still think, to your point, it's not going to be the most modern offense and not necessarily following the footsteps of like the Warriors or the Suns with some of their pretty intricate off-ball stuff. But I think it is going to be a step in the right direction. And I think in terms of the 4-out, 1-in, I think there's a obvious kind of correlation there where Thomas Bryant is going to kind of be that Brook Lopez stretch 5. I think the more interesting thing to me is what happens with the bench units, because I think you're going to get some AD at the 5.
Yeah.
But do you want him spacing the floor? Damian Jones has flashed it a little bit in his Sacramento tenure, but I don't know if the Lakers are comfortable yet with him taking, maybe end of the shot clock open 3, but like, actually kind of in the flow of a possession. I don't know where they're at yet with him and his shooting. We saw some of those LeBron small ball lineups with LeBron at the 5, Stanley at the 5. So maybe they go more to that, but like, I think with a starting lineup, it's a bit of a cleaner fit and kind of implementing what Milwaukee was doing that way, where you can see LeBron and AD doing some of the stuff that Giannis did. Again, Thomas Bryant kind of in that stretch 5 role. But beyond that, I'm interested to see kind of what direction they go with the bench and how much of it's AD, how much of it's LeBron. Can Damian JTA maybe at the 5s a little bit, but yeah. So I don't. It's not the best answer. I think we'll get a better idea come training camp, but I do think that already from what I saw in summer league, I was a bit more encouraged with just some of the handoff stuff, some of the pin down stuff. Like I think the offense is headed in a better direction. But yeah, I mean, there's only so much they could do with the current shooting. So I think that's where adding a Kyrie plus something else or a Buddy Hield, like that would do wonders for the offense.
Yeah, no doubt. I think one of the things that Lakers fans from that championship year were just so excited about from game in and game out were those home run balls that LeBron or AD or Rondo, whoever, were throwing full outlet passes for easy buckets. Even though the Lakers were high in pace
What are
last year.
easy buckets?
Right, exactly. Even though they were high in pace last year, it feels like we saw 0 of those. So yeah, if we could get back to that mix of, having aggressive basketball than just, throwing it down the court and it going out of bounds, that'd be love. So appreciate it, Jovan. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's see. Let's just do a time check real quick. Jovan, how much longer do we have you? I want to try to get as many speakers in as possible.
Yeah, I could go till 6.
Cool. Okay,
Oh,
great.
perfect. Okay. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go to Omni next. Omni.
Appreciate y'all. Even though I know for a fact that you asked Jovan those questions about THT specifically to trigger me. It was targeted. It was baited. I've known you all long enough to know that you're very deliberate in terms of your brutality and delivering pain specifically upon me. So,
Well, Omni Laker, you haven't listened to me for 2 years, so I figured maybe you'd listen to a credentialed
mm,
individual.
interesting. Well, Jovan, you know what? We'll get back to the THT business in a bit. I'm not gonna stoop myself into the mud pit that is slandering a Lakers champion at the ripe young age of 21. But there's something that interesting that you did say earlier when you were speaking, describing the Lakers fan that really just puts all of the blame exclusively and solely on Russ for last season's performance. And in that description, you perfectly described myself. I blame Russ for absolutely everything that took place last season. And what I want to ask you is, what was your favorite package to get him the fuck up out of my team? Um, so yeah, I have that would be my first question. I just have one THT follow up, but you can expand on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's Kyrie plus a Nets role player. One of Joe Harris, Royce O'Neal, Seth Curry. I think just those two would step in immediately and be, I think, the third and fourth best players on the roster. And in the case of Royce and Joe, most likely start. And I think just kind of envisioning that lineup of, now maybe you're going Thomas Bryant, AD, LeBron, Joe Harris, and Kyrie, or Royce O'Neal and Kyrie. Like I just, and now Austin's coming off the bench playing a bit, a big role off the bench. Like I think that's takes them to a different level. And because right now, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but like the West is loaded, and
Yeah.
you have teams like the Clippers and the Nuggets getting healthy. You still have the Warriors and the Suns and the Grizzlies and the Mavericks. Timberwolves got Gobert. Like Pelicans are getting Zion back. Like the West is absolutely loaded. Where like you could tell me the Lakers are fighting for home court, and you could tell me they're at the bottom of the play-in tournament, and I would kind of believe any of those ranges, depending on what happens with Russ. So I think, yeah, like it's just that to me is probably the one that really takes them to a contender level. I do like the Buddy Hield and Miles Turner one. I think Miles Turner is like the perfect front court partner for AD. You can still do the 5-out stuff, but or four in, or I mean 1 in 4 out, but then have a much better defender in Miles Turner compared to Thomas Bryant. And so I think those two are clearly above all the other packages, be it Charlotte or Utah or whatever. But between the two, I think Brooklyn, just getting that top 15 guy, top 20 guy in Kyrie, I think just gives them a different ceiling, especially offensively.
You see, Jovan, that was a test because I wanted to know how much optimism that you still had left in this Kyrie deal, and you still having optimism in the Kyrie deal lets me know that you have the Lakers' best interest at heart, despite writing for the Clippers at one point in time. You had a job to do. You got to dirty your hands every now and then. It is what it is. We've all been there. Now that I know that you're one of us, now that I know that I can trust you with this question. Well, not even really so much of a question. I'm really just trying to trust you with the fact that and give you an opportunity to be the first one to break that THT is going to be the 2023 Kia MVP Most Improved Player. You see that this man, he had a twisted ankle, and he also had to play with one of the worst players that gets above 30 minutes in the entire NBA, and that is Russell Westbrook. So basically playing ahead of him and alongside of him and basically ruining his entire last year. It's just a funny coincidence that Frank Vogel all of a sudden got terrible, and THT got terrible, and everybody got terrible when Russ showed up. But anyway, I'm giving you the opportunity because I trust you and I like you, that you can break this story about THT before anybody else.
So I'm sorry in advance, Jovan. We had to put up with this all season long, even after multiple 2 for 13 performances.
Oh,
This type of caping. Um, Hey, this man will put on a cape and jump from a building over THT. So we apologize in advance.
That's all good.
Oh my goodness. All right. Who's next, Stacey?
Okay. Let's go to New Dawn. Go ahead.
Hey, Jovan. Thank you for taking our questions here.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question. The first question is more so about Russ, because it seems like I read a lot of your articles about just Russ and everything like that, and I kind of want a better understanding of kind of what his former agent was kind of saying. Is it safe to assume that his former agent was kind of hinting that Russ wanted out? That's my first question.
Yes, I would say it is safe to assume that. From what I've been told.
Wow.
Okay, so that was
straight. That's all he can say. New Don, jump straight into the next question.
Yeah. So then my second question is
Wow.
the second question is, how likely is it that the Lakers say after that they went from literally, okay, we might keep him, to now it's untenable, we're going to move him at all costs?
I don't think it's reached that point yet, but I've written, like, if you gave the Lakers truth serum, they want to move Russ. I think it's in their best interest to not say that publicly, right? I think they're not coming
Thank
from a
you.
point of leverage in a lot of these negotiations, because I think most people know that they want to trade Russ. So I think, again, whether it's fair or not, and I think part of it's just because they're the Lakers, and that's sort of the cost of being the Lakers. Like, when they enter these negotiations, people are asking for the moon, and it really is like, give us everything that you have that's tradable, or close to it, to take on Russ. And because teams know that, and there are some situations that maybe, it would benefit the team to kind of clear some cap space and stuff. But for the most part, I think, teams have been playing hardball with the Lakers. So I think it's really more of a leverage and kind of posturing thing, in terms of just, it's in their best interest for negotiations to really just, okay, we're keeping Russ. He's part of the big three again. Fences are mended. Like, you had the report of that call between LeBron, AD, and Russ, but that took place like 4 or 5 days before
Right.
he fired his agent. So I was like, how effective was that conversation?
That's why
we
if
were
he still
in
ended
this
up firing
space.
his agent.
Yeah, we
So
were in this space, Jovan, and we were like literally pointing out the operative words for people because there was panic ensuing.
yeah, so I think it's just from what I've been told, like, there is this bit of a soft deadline of training camp where I think the Lakers are going to get a little bit more serious with some of their negotiations and their offers of just, okay, like, I think right now there's a big game of chicken going on, where it's like, okay, we're only going to give up this. Well, we want this. And you go back and forth and you negotiate. But I think come training camp, there's going to be more pressure on the Lakers to figure out the Russ situation. There's going to be more pressure on the Nets, potentially, depending on where this KD and Kyrie stuff goes in the next 6 or 7 weeks. So I think come training camp, that week and a half before training camp is when you're going to see, I think, some of this stuff heat back up. And that's when I suspect, I think we'll get closer to a deal around then.
So I got one last question, piggyback off that. So how married, because a lot of people are like, Jenny and Rob is like married to not giving up that other pick. In your opinion, or from what you've heard, how married to that? Is it more so like, we don't want to give up that extra pick just for anything, or is it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the deal and where they think they're at in terms of contention, because I think they're realistic that right now they're not a contender. right? Like, I mean, obviously with LeBron and AD, and I think if AD gets back to like 2018-19 Pelicans or 2019-20 Lakers version, like they just might have enough top end talent to compete with anyone. And you don't want to see LeBron and AD in a 7-game series, but realistically, they're probably not contending with the current roster and with Russ as the third guy. So I think they're kind of looking at it through the prism of, if we do this deal, are we a contender? And I think they believe that with the Kyrie deal. I think there's some split on the Indiana deal of how good they would be, and then some of these other deals are probably more so, hey, we're getting off of Russ, but we're not quite at that contention level. So I think it really just comes down to the package that they're getting back, and I think ultimately they would give up that second pick for Kyrie. I think the Indiana one's a little more tricky. I think that's probably one that they don't fold on, but I think it could go either way. And then I think some of these other ones that we've heard, like a Knicks deal or a Utah deal, like, or maybe a 3-team with those two, like that's where they're probably like, nah, we're gonna we'll give out one pick, but we're not trading a second. But the tricky thing is, like, even a 3-team trade, one team's going to want to pick and then another team's going to want to pick. So you almost have to give up 2 picks. So it's going to be tricky, but I think ultimately the way it's trending right now, it's looking like they end up getting Kyrie and give up a couple picks.
Yeah, that would be glorious. I'm going to keep it swinging real quick. Ahmed, jump in here, make it quick, and then we could try to get everybody who's up here a shot real quick.
Yeah, hey, Jovan. So a lot of people are saying that Lakers can't get Kyrie until the Nets trade KD, but isn't it, if Rob Pelinka picks up the phone right now and calls Sean Marks and offers both first round picks, 2027, 2029, isn't Kyrie a Laker by the end of the day?
It's a good question, because that specific kind, like it's almost like like the order of operations is different depending on who you talk to. And I will say, obviously, I'm more plugged in on the Lakers side than the Nets side. But the one consistent thing I've heard, and others have obviously heard and reported, is they do want the KD situation settled. Now, I think yesterday was a big step in the direction of settling it, in that he's just not going to be there and they're going to inevitably have to trade him at some point. So I think the Nets were holding out hope that they could convince KD to stay. And I think even if they did convince KD to stay, there was a scenario in which they still ended up trading Kyrie. I think they just want, like, KD's obviously the centerpiece of that team and, kind of the main guy there. So I think they wanted that clarity one way or the other. KD obviously came out, yesterday and made it clear, I don't want to stay. I still want out unless you do XYZ, which he knows they're not going to do. So I think there is a scenario in which they could still trade for Kyrie, I guess, kind of separate of the KD situation. But I still think that's so fresh. It's been a little over 24 hours. Like, I think it's still kind of unclear what direction that they're going to go in with that. But to your point, I mean, I think that the Nets would strongly consider that, and I just think the Lakers also don't. Lakers don't want to give up 2 picks like that. I think they're going to have to with the way the negotiation is going. But because if you just look at it, like, there's only so much the Lakers can give up. We know that they have relatively limited assets of a couple picks. They could throw in, obviously, Russ, a THT, a Kendrick Nunn. Like, the maximum you could get from the Lakers versus the maximum you could get from Team X, Team Y, whatever. So I think there's still kind of a hardball element to this. But to your point, like, maybe I wouldn't be shocked if that ended up being the deal and it happened, tomorrow. But I still think it's going to get dragged out a bit. And the Nets probably also, because there's a question of, do the Nets, because some of the kind of stuff that's come out of there has been the Nets still want to be competitive. And if the Nets want to be competitive, that changes the way they approach the KD trade, and that changes the way they approach a Kyrie trade. But if they're rebuilding and they're just, hey, we want to get a lottery pick next summer, then I think the Russ deal makes a lot of sense for them, because you're getting a couple picks, you're getting Russ, you could buy him out, or you can play him. And, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, I guess, but I think potentially, but I do think it's most likely the KD situation will be resolved first in the form of a trade, I think, before Kyrie's move.
Nice. All right, jump in, Richard.
What's going on, Jovan? Real quickly, just two quick things. First, thanks for the follow the other week. Appreciate the love. And second, your work on The Athletic is nothing short of phenomenal. I think you've done an amazing job. And you actually told me on getting a full subscription to The Athletic. So appreciate your work, man. I'm just going to ask three quick questions, and you can answer in rapid fire questions because I want to be considerate.
Hey, Rich, if he's got limited time, so if there are three,
right, yeah,
make them super quick.
All right, so now I'll get it two. Okay, so all right, so got you. So first question. Darvin Ham stated about a month ago that he wasn't able to get LeBron, AD, and Russ in the same room because of conflicting schedules and all that. Have you heard any updates on if Ham specifically has been able to get all those three together, because of we're talking about how untenable the situation is? And second, have you heard anything about the off-season work that Anthony Davis has been going through to prepare himself for this season, like you did with Austin Reeves? Because I think AD is really the big X factor this season. I mean, the free throw shooting has just gone down, and it's I think we're really expecting a big bounce back season. So I'm just wondering if you heard anything on that end. So you can answer those two things for me, and I'll shut up. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the kind words first and foremost. But on the first question, I haven't heard anything outside of that call that they had during the first weekend of Summer League. So I do not have an update on whether they have met in person or not. And I also haven't really heard much on AD. I know that the jump shot has obviously been a big source of his offseason focus. If you look at, as you said, his free throw shooting has gone down the last couple of years, as has his 3-point shooting. So as I was saying earlier, I do think there's still going to be a good 10, 15, 20 minutes for AD at center. And with the way that Darvin wants to run his offense, you're going to need a floor spacer out there. And, maybe it's JTA, maybe it's Stanley and some of those second unit lineups. But I think there are going to be some AD at the 5 lineups where he is picking and popping, he is spacing the floor and catch and shoot situations. So I know that's been, and we've seen the videos with Lethal Shooter, and he's been working out with him. So that's kind of the extent of it. I know I just have heard that he's really been focused on the jump shot, and I think losing a little bit of weight, slimming down a little bit, kind of getting back to where he was a couple years ago. So that's kind of been his focus and what I've heard on that front.
Okay. Jovan, we have just three more. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. Okay. Shub, go ahead. And then Mike from the OC and Byron after.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Hi, Jovan. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. Real quick for you. Obviously, this offseason was just huge about our roster, everything like that, but also for Rob Pelinka, based on what he's been kind of under pressure to do in terms of the roster year in and year out. And I know he's been actually our GM and now vice president for about 5 years now. And this is actually our 7th coach in 10 years. So in terms of like stability and like the pressure in terms of like the overarching just organizationally speaking and the job security of everyone in their roles. Can you sort of speak on that and what this offseason has been? Because we obviously know Jeannie's in a huge position and, we know she has trusted confidants and things like that. But can you just sort of speak on how the offseason has played out in terms of Rob Pelinka's job security and what that's kind of the thing?
Yeah. Everything I've heard has been positive on the Rob front in terms of Jeannie's view of him and his standing and his security. So, I know some fans are kind of split on that. And, depending on how much credit you want to give him or how much blame you want to give him. But I do think if they have another repeat of last season, I think that is where the seat gets hot, and there would be some consideration of, do we need to move in a different direction or, kind of reconsider things? But I think he's most likely safe. And from what I've heard, Jeannie is a fan, and she is did not put the blame from last season really on Rob. I think it was Frank was obviously the scapegoat to some extent. Russ was also the scapegoat. And then, I think they also looked at the injuries, and like, I think people, for as bad as last season was, I think people sometimes kind of overlook how injured the team was, and just missing 60 plus games between AD and LeBron. Like, if you knew that, you probably would have pegged them lower in the West than they were initially projected. So, I think Rob, depending on your view of him, is safe for now, but I think they definitely need to have a better season than last season.